All right, we're gonna rock and roll right now, everybody. Good evening, good morning, good day to anyone that's still listening. We are on episode 21 of the Vets and Barbells podcast. And, much to everybody's probably surprise, I was able to grab two interviews back to back. Today we have before us a man that is large and in charge, not just with his stature, but also just how he stands in life as a man, as a husband, as a father, and as a community servant. So we're such a pleasure to have on our show tonight. Damian Bunting, someone that I only ever met through acquaintance, but I always tried to I tried a lot of times to try to meet you in person, and it just never linked up. And then once I realized you left Missouri to pursue other ventures, I was like, dang, I think I missed my chance. And then, like I told you the other night, I was just like, man, I really want to have him on the podcast, really, really bad. So
yeah, that's the beauty of one of the positives that's come out of COVID and everything that's happened over the past year is that I think we got more comfortable with having relationships, over Zoom, over Skype, and there was kind of this resurgence of everyone having face-to-face conversations, face-to-face podcasts, but we kind of found that, it's okay to socially distance. And if we really embrace this technology, we can have conversations with people all the way across the country, across the world. It opens up a lot more avenues for us to connect with people. So I think it's a good thing.
Yeah, it definitely was one of those handful of good things that probably came out of that. And yeah, I mean, you're right. I think the only struggle for me, you've probably seen it too, but at least for me and my family, a lot of my close relatives are much older individuals, and so technology is a little harder for them. And it was, I mean, my grandmother, I think turned, I'm gonna botch this, I think she turned 93
Oh,
during
wow.
during COVID, and it was just hard to not be able to, I guess, more closely share that with her. But she is in a home, and they in North Carolina, and they did take their precautionary measures and everything. So we made it work through phone calls, but still sweet regardless. So
That's good. Yeah.
anyway, but yeah, man. So luckily we have you on, and Damian Bunting again. He's one that I've kind of known through other people, but also he is a veteran. He has served our country honorably so. He's been an entrepreneur. He's learned a lot of lessons. So without much further ado, Damian, I'd love to get to know a little bit about your background, where your roots are, and kind of what led you, I guess, to choose the military. Let's hear a bit about young Damian.
Well, I think that there's three types of people that join the military. You have your legacy, what I call your legacy, and those are people whose parents were in the military. Maybe their father was in the military, family members in the military, and it's almost assumed that from a young age they're going to go into the military. And if you and I and any other veteran, we know so many people like this. We're like, hey, my dad's a chief master sergeant, my dad's a captain somewhere, and it's just always been assumed I'm going to go into the military. Your second is that group that needs to go in for college, right? So, recruiters do a great job of selling the dream of you being able to. Now, before I go into this, let me just say this: I'm a little bit older than you, and so I'm going to date myself by saying that, there was a time where the idea of going to war or the idea of being involved in armed conflict while in the military, it was kind of a, I don't want to say far-fetched, but it wasn't as prevalent as it is on the minds of everybody today. So after Desert Storm, when we pulled out of Kuwait, there was a relative decent amount of time of peacetime. So I went into the military in 96. And so from 96 up to 2001, life was great. And so there was this second wave of people that were going into the military that were strictly going in just to go to school. And the recruiters did a great job of selling the fact that we were in peacetime, that we had a surplus of military weapons, that we were coming out of that Vietnam era, Gulf War era, and that everything was moving to more of a technology-based military, and that seeing boots on the ground was going to probably be a thing of the past. So you had a large number of people in that gap, say 92 to 90, or 92 to 2000 probably, that were just going in to get quick money, serve their country, but basically doing it for the benefits, for the paycheck, and for that access to college and college tuition, right? Then you have that third group of people, and that's the group that I fell into, that was just kind of rudderless. So, when I was in school, looking back now as an older adult, my family was going through a lot of turmoil. So I didn't have that typical upbringing where your family is pushing college, pushing education. I mean, that was obviously something that my family talked about, but I wasn't on the path. My ex-wife's family, they are a very education-based family. And so just kind of watching how she has guided the kids in their college education endeavors and how her family did with her. And not that I always agree with it, but college is something that's talked about early. It's something that's planned for early. And it's not even a question if they're going to go to college. I wasn't in that situation. I went through 10th, 11th, 12th grade completely rudderless. There was no talk of SATs. There was no talk of ACTs. There was no college prep courses. I was just kind of just meandering through school. And I wasn't a good student up until about the 9th grade, when I realized that if I didn't make some quick changes, I wasn't even going to graduate.
Yeah.
So I learned how to study, how to manipulate those classes. And I actually did good my 11th and 12th grade year, but I had no direction on what I was going to do. The only thing is that my dad told me that I had to be out of the house when I turned 18. So my birthday was June 22nd of 1996. I was going to be turning 18. And I signed up for the military in May as a 17-year-old. So that is what got me into the military. I wasn't, overly patriotic. I didn't grow up in a military household. I just knew that I couldn't stay where I was, and I had to find my own way. And it was an interesting situation, but that's how I got into the military.
Okay. Dude, I mean, even of its own, I mean, everyone, I mean, you've seen it, I've seen it while serving. I mean, people come, like you were saying, from all walks of life. There's many different reasons. Like you said, I love the three ways you broke that down: the legacy, kind of the college group, and then the rudderless. And I love that word. And it also reminds me, you ever see that movie, Rudderless?
No.
Oh, dude, I would watch it, dude. It's pretty powerful. And it kind of goes along those lines of someone that has found themselves rudderless in life and has to find purpose through something. And in the movie, it's musical related. Um, but I definitely echo kind of what you were kind of like, what led you is, for me, my dad's dad was kind of military, but there wasn't much that from my father's side at all. In fact, I didn't even know my father's family, most of them, for a long time. My mother, though, came from she was a Navy brat. Her father, my grandfather, was a captain, and then I think an admiral in the Navy, and had served in the Pentagon before he got tired of the politics there and got out. Uh,
Yeah.
and so I had that kind of in the background, but even from a young age, it like even I remember the calls from the recruiters through high school that were so annoying of like, oh, we want to meet with you. And I was straight up like, for years, like, not my thing, don't want to do it. No, even though, and again, this dates, so I mean, I was born in 91. Okay. So yes, I am younger. I just turned 30 this year. But the thing is, I grew up in the well, at that time I was living in Northern Virginia, just south of DC. I was alive and in fifth or sixth grade when the Twin Tower and the Pentagon attack happened.
Yeah.
So even though I was telling these recruiters no, in the back of my head with that event, I always thought someone has to pay, or so, and for a long time I carried that until I had to get my head straight. And I've talked about it on this podcast already, so I won't go into the details. But essentially, I got to a point in life where I was like, I just need something to direct me, to give me purpose,
Yeah.
And serving my country, and especially joining the Marine Corps, it resonated with me of what I wanted to do.
Absolutely.
And whether people choose college or the military, or do the military for college, like what I've always been a proponent of is go in with an open mind, be a sponge, and serve honorably for whatever time that is.
And what's crazy is that you can go in in any one of those three directions.
Mhm.
But what I find so interesting is that depending on your duty station, depending on your your MOS, we call it AFSC in the Air Force,
Okay.
but depending on your job classification and how things work out, you can shift between any one of those three. You can go in as a legacy and you can be so disheartened by what you see, especially, like for me, guys whose grandfathers were, say, World War II vets,
Mhm.
and then their dads were Vietnam vets, right?
Yeah.
So you're talking about two eras of military campaigns where they were in theater and they were losing people's lives so quickly. So you're literally getting field commission from, you're going from potentially the World War II guys, they were going from private first class and they stepped right off the boat in Normandy. And then before you know it, you're it. And you're the senior private first class. Guess what? You're a captain now.
Yeah.
And then when that guy comes back home after storming the beach in Normandy and serves another 20 years, this guy is coming out, as a colonel. So for people in my generation, they grew up understanding how that aspect of the military worked in World War II and in Vietnam. And then you get into peacetime after Desert Storm and everything. I'm not saying that the military hasn't always been political, but as we got into more of the the PC culture, you've got into more of the millennial culture, not millennial, but Gen Z culture rather, things started to change and it became more about testing. I remember seeing like a lot of the hazing was starting to get phased out when I was coming in. A lot of the hazing in fitness or just in like your own units or your own squadrons, like, every unit, every squadron has different traditions and things that have been passed down for generations, and those things were starting to get phased out. So I think that it was possible for someone to be a legacy, go in and see this change that they had heard completely contradictory ways that the military was operated when their dad or their grandfather was in, and they become rudderless. Or you have someone that goes in rudderless and they've never had any direction. They find, structure, they find success, they find, camaraderie, and then they become something that creates a legacy with their kid and their kid's kid. Or you get people that were rudderless and go in and think, wow, now that I'm here, I'm going to take advantage of this GI Bill and I'm going to utilize that, and they become a college person. So you can go in one of those three categories, but that doesn't mean that that's how you're going to come out. And I think that that's also like an interesting aspect of military life too.
Yeah. I think a big thing too that kind of gets discounted as you're kind of saying all of that. It kind of sparked my, my thought is, a lot of people like discount the military for one thing or another, and but there's so many benefits to it. Like even if you're not in, say, a warfighting branch, or there's so many other jobs to do, so many benefits to learn, like you were saying, whether it's structure or a job or just finding a purpose. But there's also, like, even though the military by personnel, depending on your rank, like maybe you don't get paid a whole lot, but there's so many benefits that come along that do assist you in your day-to-day life.
Absolutely.
Like the health insurance, like even though I've been in the reserves for a long time and I have to buy into TRICARE has paid for both my daughters to be born.
Right.
Like, and as I'm possibly out processing in August, I think I'll be at about 8 years. We're shopping around trying to figure out, and I mean, there's nothing out there on the civilian side that can compare to the coverage of TRICARE.
Bro, the best, I'm a disabled veteran, but the way that I got hurt in the military, I worked on the B-2 stealth bomber. So on the stealth bomber, without getting into too many details, when you replace an actuator in one of the elevators on the back of the plane, you have to physically push it up to get the vacuum lock out of that actuator. So you replace the actuator, you've drained all the hydraulic fluid, you put new fluid in it, and then you physically push the elevator up, and the computer system reads that absolute zero. You push it all the way down and it reads that absolute zero. And then based on, canceling out that actuator on both ends, the avionics of the plane can tell where the elevator is. And I can't even believe that I remember this shit 20 years ago. But the person that was in the plane had the throttle pushed forward instead of in the neutral position. So when I went to push that elevator up with all my power and all my strength, it didn't go anywhere, and I broke my wrist. Okay. So that breakage of my wrist happened maybe 6 months before I got out of the military. So the last 6 months of the time that I was in the military, that took me off of the deployment list, right? So now I'm going to doctor's appointments. I'm going to see specialists. I had my surgery. I had to do rehab. So the last 6 months of my time in the military was basically dealing with this wrist issue. I get out of the military and they rate me at 30% disabled. Now that was 22 years ago, which I need to go back in and get that up a little bit. But my point is to say this: I had no idea at the time. So I got out in 2002, right? I had no idea that Obama was going to come into office at some point and pass this universal health care that now it's a mandate that you buy insurance. I would never have been able to, I wouldn't even now be able to afford health insurance. But because I'm 30% disabled, not only do I get a check every month, but my health insurance for the rest of my life is taken care of. And that two-pronged thing has made my time in the military completely worth it.
To everyone listening, get everything documented.
Absolutely.
And make 3 copies of everything.
Yeah.
I mean, man, yeah, there's a lot that, well, I mean, I don't know how it is in the Air Force, but definitely in the Marine Corps, there's this culture of like, just shut up and push through it. Like, just don't say anything about whatever's going on. And there's definitely a few things that happened very early on that now I'm like,
Yeah, the Air Force is completely the opposite. It's like, how can I get out of going on deployment? My toe hurts. I think I have gout. And by the way, I need a copy of that for my record so I can get paid when I get out. Like, that's the Air Force way.
Yeah, our corpsman's like, oh, you're hurting? Well, change your socks, drink more water. Here's some Percocet. Well, when I first got in, gosh, they would hand out Oxy or ibuprofen like it was freaking candy.
Yeah.
Then they started cracking down on it because, I don't know, maybe too much Oxy floating around the line companies is a bad thing. I don't know.
It's crazy how things have changed, man. And I can't even imagine what it must have been like for those old timers, man. Like, and it's good and it's bad. I think that there's some great things to be said about that attitude of the Marines who just push through. And there's also something to be said for the foresightedness of people like the Navy and the Air Force. And that's what makes our military so amazing and so strong, is that, if we simply had a bunch of grunts, I don't think that we'd be nearly as effective. And then obviously we wouldn't be nearly as strong if we had a bunch of brains. So having both of those classes, man, it just makes us what we are.
It really is. And I definitely agree with you. Like, everyone's, we have the inter-service rivalries, we have the things that we egg each other on with, but in the end, it is one team, one fight. And I think what illustrates that best too is the Marine Corps itself has this concept called the MAGTAF, so the Marine Air Ground Task Force. And it's something that we're able to accomplish by, like, we have the ground, the air, and the intel assets all within. But even when we don't have those, we have the other branches that we can rely on and utilize. And the more that communication opens up those lines, despite the diversity of, oh, we have to work together. It's like, no, we should want to work together
Absolutely.
to accomplish the mission. And I think even though I haven't been stationed around a whole ton of Air Force guys, but when I get stationed around or I have to work with Army guys, one, it's rough because there's a huge discipline divide. But like, you get to see, okay, yes, there is a culture difference. All right, whatever. The mission comes first, or your personnel come first.
Yeah.
And you just figure it out. But yeah, dude, man, that was really good thoughts right there, dude. Like, that was awesome. But that kind of, like what you kind of mentioned at the beginning, kind of rolls into my next question. So your job, again, without getting into the classified, I was like a kid in a candy store when you were talking about your job, man. So you worked on the stealth bombers. So how did, like, How did that come about? What did you learn? What are lessons kind of like you took away from your time in your MOS and what you did within the Air Force?
I think that I vastly took for granted that opportunity because the plane had just come online when I got in. So, it was a black project up until I want to say like 92, 94-ish. So I come in 96, the plane is coming out of Edwards Air Force Base from Skunk Works, and it's just like this top secret program. So when I got to Whiteman Air Force Base, I was one of the first like 60 to 70 guys who was on this project. What's crazy is that when I got to Whiteman, they only had, if I'm not mistaken, I want to say maybe 6 hangars. And by the time I left, I don't want to, my memory is starting to slip. And I did kind of a dump when I left, a mind dump, but I want to say we had 14 hangars by the time I left. And I know there's more there now. They actually have a station unit of B2s located at the airbase in Guam. And when I was in, Guam was just a forwarding location for us. So a lot of things have changed over time. I think that I took for granted that I was a part of something that was so special. This program was, I believe, instituted by Ronald Reagan. This is one of the first stealth projects that actually panned out and came to fruition. There was a lot of things that were developed before that never made it. If you've watched Captain America, which Captain America is it? The one with the Hydra guy with the red skull. There's actually a, you know what I'm talking about? That's his name, Red Skull. So whichever one it is where Red Skull is the major character, there's a scene in there where they're flying in the B-32 or the B-46. I can't remember exactly what the prototype was, but that was the winged shape of a plane that they created back in the 30s or 40s. That I believe was a prototype, and they utilized that same design for the B-2 bomber. So when you look at the B-2 bomber, you're seeing a plane that was designed in the 30s that was like an eight propeller bomber, and they took that and they created the B-2 program. So anyway, when I got to Whiteman, I was sent, the way that they trained us, they sent us to Edwards Air Force Base, where the next like 7 planes were being built. And the way that they trained us to remove and replace pieces on that plane is that you would go in and they would give you a sheet and they would say, bring me 4 actuators, bring me 3 hydraulic pumps. And you would have to go and check out the equipment. You would take those pieces off. It would take you 7 hours because you had no idea how to turn a wrench. And you would take it over to the GS8 guy that was running the shop, and you would say, hey, I'm done. And he would go, great, go put him back. And then you would go put him back. And then when you put him back, you come over and you go, okay, I'm done. He would go, great, go take him off again. And you literally did that with everything in your department, whether it was brakes, whether it was bomb bay panels, whether it was actuators, anything that was dealing with your department. So I, completely unaware of everything, I'm literally working within Skunk Works, which is a black ops, secure top secret location where they're building an invisible plane. And I'm just walking around with my dick in my hand like this is just normal. You know what I mean? And it's not normal. I got to go to Las Vegas. Our sister base was Nellis Air Force Base because they have the F-117, right? So I went to Nellis 4 times, and that's at the end of Las Vegas Boulevard. Stayed at the Las Vegas Boulevard Air Base, went and saw Vegas for my first time. I was getting $75 a day per diem plus my normal pay. And I had an Air Force car, and I'm 19 years old on the Strip. You know what I mean? I got to meet President Clinton in 1998, the first time that the B-2 was ever used in combat. We destroyed a couple of barracks and bridges of Slobodan Milosevic, who was involved in genocidal acts in Kosovo. And so I was able to be a part of that. And out of that campaign, they selected 9 people to meet with Bill Clinton. So this was in 1998, right after he had gotten impeached for his Monica Lewinsky situation. So I got to go into an aircraft hangar and meet with the Secret Service and be told that I was not to bring up the fact that he had just gotten impeached. Don't make any jokes about cigars. And I got to have a 5-minute conversation with the President of the United States. All of these things, great experiences, things that I'll tell my grandchildren, and hopefully they'll tell their children, my great grandchildren, things like that. But at the time I took it for granted. I got out in August of 2000. Now here's a quick story. Okay. When I signed my commitment, now remember I told you I graduated in May, signed my commitment in May, and was gone that August. I turned 18 in June. I go to sign my commitment and my recruiter's like, yeah, it's a 4-year commitment. And my dad's like, make sure you read the fine print.
Yeah.
So right before I sign, I look and I start reading and it says 6-year commitment. And I'm like, excuse me, sir, you said it's a 4-year commitment. He goes, hey, listen, it is 4 years. You got 4 years active.
Yeah.
You have 2 years inactive. He goes, but it would take an act of like, say, Pearl Harbor for them to call you back. So I'm like, well, shit, Pearl Harbor, it's been a while, like we're good. Yeah, so I go in, I get out in 2000, move to Kansas City. I'm married. I've got 2 kids at the time. I buy a house, buy a car, I'm out. And then September 11th happens. And I'm like, shit, I still have time on my inactive reserve. So I call my first sergeant back at Whiteman, and I'm like, "Hey, I've got like 8 months left on my inactive reserve. Like, what does this mean?" And he goes, "It means that they can call you back." And I'm like, "I just bought a house. I just took a job." And he goes, "What do you think you signed up for, man? Like, this is what we do." So I'm thinking, surely I'm not going to get recalled. I kid you not, man. Within like 4 weeks of that conversation, I get a Department of Defense letter. Oh, by the way, Airman Bunting, you still have 8 months left on your inactive reserve. Do not leave the state without contacting Whiteman Air Force Base, without letting someone know where you're going. You're still subject to recall. So for the next 8 months, every time I go to the mailbox and pull out a Publishers Clearinghouse envelope, my asshole's about that tight. Because I'm thinking to myself, like, I didn't go in the military to go fight in Afghanistan. And that's what they were talking. They're like, look, we're getting ready. Bush comes out with the megaphone. We can't hear you. And he's like, I can hear you. And the people that did this are going to hear all of us soon. Like, I'm like, oh shit. They're getting, you know what I mean? Yeah. So I'm like, they're getting ready to give me an M16 and some boots and be like, go to the sandbox. And like, I haven't prepared for this. So luckily, it was another, year before they got everything together and started moving people out. And that included the Air Force. They're at the beginning of, was it Enduring Freedom or whatever the name was? And I apologize, I don't remember, but they were sending everybody. They hit Afghanistan, they hit Iraq with everything. And it was like, I'm talking to guys who were in the military with me that served a full 20 years. They're like, bro, after September 11th, like, our uniforms went from green to brown, and like, we're in the sandbox. And like, if you were in any sort of, what do they call it? Oh my gosh, I'm so lost in my military jargon here, but the guys that like go in and create the infrastructure, civil engineering. Oh, okay. Air Force, they call it civil engineering, right? Generally, civil engineers, they go over, they're digging roads, they're setting up water stations, they're getting things ready. I had friends who were in that AFSE, and they're getting guns and they're kicking in doors. Yeah. So I really feel, I hate to say that I feel lucky, because I don't want to discount or discredit the people that were in at that time, that were forced, not necessarily forced, but that went into that situation. God bless them. And for those who came back, like, thank you for their service. I don't want to say that I was blessed to not have to go in a way that's disrespectful to them. Yeah. But I was that rudderless guy that got into the military that never thought 2 steps ahead of where I was. I was just in the moment. And so like I've told, my daughter, she wants to go to med school and she's in college now. And before she decided to go, where she is now, she was actually thinking about potentially signing up for the military. And I tried to have this conversation with her, like, look, they're going to sell you on, you're going to go to college, you're going to take care of it, but you need to understand, like, if you sign that paperwork, you're in the military. Like, don't get it twisted. Like, you're a soldier for the amount of time that's on that contract. And if it's, 4+2, or if it's 6+2, that's it. Like, and there's no talking your way out of it. There's no one to call. Of course, my daughter's uncle, I believe, is a colonel right now, special forces. So maybe she would be able to finagle that. But for most people, that's not the case. You know what I mean? So anyway, yeah, you're making me think about a whole bunch of stuff that I haven't thought about in a long time, man.
I mean, good or bad? Like, I don't mean to.
No, it's all good.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, it's crazy too. And I knew a lot of people during that time that were still in. I know some buddies that, I mean, they're older than I am, but they were Rangers, and they had done a couple tours and went to get out, and they got stop lost.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. And I didn't realize how big that was until I saw the movie Stop Loss. And then literally a week later, I found out that, two older buddies of mine, I mean, it had directly happened to them. Like, went to get out and they're like, nope.
And that's the worst thing about stop loss, is that those guys were in the box. So, and they don't project your stop loss. So you have guys that are 2.5, 3 months from coming home, and then they get notified. It's like they didn't give people 6 to 8 months of advance notice. There's people who are like, man, I'm going home in 3 weeks. And they're like, oh, guess what? Yeah. And like, I can't even imagine what that would have done to people, and their morale. And like, you literally are just handcuffed to where you're at.
I mean, especially if they've got people back home, and then some people don't, but a lot of people do, especially the married. I mean, you're saying their families are then expecting them just to have them home, be able to know that they are coming home, and then not.
You got to make that phone call, tell your wife, like, oh man.
Yeah, I can't even imagine, man.
So listen, I want to get you one more question, and then I got a jet. I've got to go to this interview. So whatever your most important question is, let me answer.
Man. So yeah. I mean, we got a late start to it, but it's all good. So the biggest thing out of that and the transition, and like I said, the big thing about this podcast I wanted us to do was this topic of stand your ground. Like, what I have always appreciated about you, of anything that I've come across that you've put out there, it's very much you wear your feelings on your sleeve.
Unfortunately.
And well, for good or bad. But at the same time, no one has to second guess where you stand, or even the things that I put out there. Like, what I say is what I say, and I believe it wholeheartedly. And kind of talking with you of like, your intro of what led you in there, the lessons you learned, even though you took them for granted, you can look back and see, the big things that if you were to try to impart to this new generation coming up, listening, or even maybe some of my peers, your peers, I mean, what would you say that, to stand your ground on something, to be true to you, what would you like to impart to this next, the people listening?
Well, so when I was a kid, all the rappers were into the movie Scarface, right? And so there's that Tony Montana part where he goes, all I have is my balls and my word, right? And like, that was a big thing when I was in high school. All I have is my balls and my word, my balls and my word, my balls and my word. And like, we were saying that, but we didn't understand it. And then as you go through life, especially for us men, there's a point, there's an apex. There's a point in a man's life, like when you hit, it can happen early, like in your early 20s, or it can happen in your early 30s. But there's a point where you really start to just say, you know what, I'm a fucking man. I'm not going to take it. And you start to stand on your square, and then everyone around you starts shaving that off. People in your family will be like, especially for military guys. So like, you come home and you're like, you're different.
Yeah.
Then everybody tells you that. They're like, bro, you're different. And you're like, yeah, like, you know where I just came from? Well, you're different. You're not over there anymore. Like, calm down. And they start to just kind of sand all those edges off. And before you know it, you find yourself a middle-aged man. You're a father, you're a husband, you're working a job, a 9 to 5, and you've taken that hardened man and you've shrunk him down to about that big, okay? And you put him right in here. and you become what society wants you to become,
Yeah.
whatever that is, right? And then you get to a point where you still find out that the bullshit doesn't change, even though you've conformed and you've changed and you've calmed down and you've taken the edge off and you're not so aggressive and now you're more passive. Hey, everything's fine. You're fine. I'm fine. We're fine. You still find out that you still get fucked over. The bullshit doesn't change. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You still have problems with your kids, problems with your wife, problems with your finances. So you get to a point where you're getting older and you start to recognize your time is running out. And when you start to recognize your time is running out, you get to a point where you're like, you know what? Fuck it. I'm going to be myself. I got very little time left. I'm going to be myself. I'm going to say what I mean. I'm going to mean what I say. All I have is my balls and my fucking word, right?
Yeah.
Well, what I would impart to people is if you're going to start this way and you're going to end this way, just fucking be this way from the very beginning. The second that you recognize what you want out of life and who you are in life and what's important to you, what your boundaries are, what you stand for. Once you recognize that, over time, you can take that dial and turn it up, turn it down, but don't turn it off. And society wants you to turn it off. You can't do that because that's what makes people put that gun to their head, man, because they start to realize what they left on the table. If you never turn it off, but you allow yourself to turn the dial up or down, you have more control, but you're still yourself.
Yes.
Just don't lose yourself.
Yeah, dude, drop mic, you know, like that was nuggets, man. That's a big thing. Like the moment you start to conform, the more you start trying to live by somebody else's vision, somebody else's standard, you lose who you are. And if anything in life, we should be getting better. We should be getting more honest, more true, and learning the entire time. Like who I was 7 years ago before I got married is not the person I am now. There are qualities that only got stronger, especially since I joined the military, that I espouse more, that I live very firmly by my sword. But at the same time, all I've done is continue to keep an open mind, learn from other people. You know, all the craziness going on in the world, you know, from all the years, I sit back and I think, well, what are the things that I can connect with somebody on? Music, food. Like there are things that we can share if you have an open mind.
Absolutely.
There's so much out there that even though we may not fully agree on things, and I'm who I am, you're who you are, I bet you we can sit down and talk about any type of 90s music.
Absolutely.
90s, early 2000s. I think it was the best era of music ever.
Yeah, Fuel, my favorite band.
Boom. But anyway, Damian, I don't want to keep you up. Thank you so much for your time. Everybody listening, I hope you really grab out of here just these nuggets, these life lessons that Damian has shared with us that we have communicated on. And as always, people, stand true for who you are and keep your powder dry.
Absolutely. All right, be great.